So, if you're interested in defeating Donald Trump come November, I have some terrifying, even if not particularly shocking, news for you guys. Joe Biden is incredibly unpopular. I mean, this is an unbelievable negative 22 points, negative 22 points underwater. I mean, you can see here only 34% favorable to 56% unfavorable. I mean, this is terrible news for Joe Biden. And I mean, when you look at this here compared to national average, still some good news for Joe Biden supporters out there. Joe Biden is still ahead 3 points compared to Donald Trump. But of course, this doesn't factor in swing states, whereas you know, last time around, Hillary Clinton winning the popular vote, but then losing in the electoral college. And even when you look at the electoral college, it's not a super rosy picture for Joe Biden. Joe Biden is in a pretty weak place. I mean, there's still, of course, the possibility of Joe Biden winning this thing, and we're going to sort of talk about that a little bit in a minute. But I mean, you can see here in the head-to-head in terms of favorability, Donald Trump is more popular than Joe Biden in like every. I mean, this is unbelievable here. 43% favorable for Donald Trump. So 43% of the country are like, yeah, I like this guy. I have a favorable opinion. Opinions for Joe Biden, only 34%. Fewer people say that they have a favorable opinion of Joe Biden than they do of Donald Trump. I mean, this is the person, Donald Trump is the person who everybody's been saying that you need to hate, that you need to absolutely hate because look at how he's going to like pollute the minds of children, right? But people say they like him a lot more. Unfavorable, 56% versus unfavorable, 55%. Fewer people have an unfavorable opinion of Donald Trump than they say that they have an unfavorable opinion of Joe Biden. And of course, in the nets, Donald Trump also having a lower net unfavorability. Now, of course, negative 12 also isn't like, you know, a position that's like super optimal and super ideal. So it's not like people love Donald Trump either. It's just that people really, really, really do not like Joe Biden. So really, really bad news for Joe Biden. Really, really bad news. Now, when it comes to this whole thing, obviously, I mean, I've mentioned it on this channel before. It's kind of up in the air in terms of who's going to win or who's going to lose. It's kind of hard to tell at this point, really. I mean, we've seen just how much can change in just, you know, a very short amount of time, especially when we're talking about this pandemic stuff. I think at this point, I mean, I've mentioned it before. It really is it's in a sense Donald Trump's election to lose because Donald Trump here, all he has to do is not stumble, right? Like if Donald Trump does an even okay job at handling this stuff, and people are like, okay, he looks competent, he looks like he knows what he's doing, then honestly, voters are probably going to be like, yeah, keep doing it, because they might not want to have the risk of a change in the middle of a crisis, right? And so, in many respects, all Donald Trump needs to do is not stumble, and he's probably going to win. However, on the other hand, can we really trust Donald Trump to not stumble? Donald Trump very likely will, and in many respects, he already has stumbled in many, many ways. Now, one of the things that Donald Trump is doing, I mean, I mentioned this maybe like a week and a half ago on this channel. Donald Trump is doing significantly fewer like televised long form briefings where he's in front of the camera, because that was one of the things where he was getting tons and tons of really high ratings. People were watching it, people were consuming it. I mean, people were home in quarantine. What else are they going to do? Let's follow the news and see what's going on with this stuff. And Donald Trump was getting really, really good ratings, but his favorability was starting to dip as people were, you know, looking into it a little bit more closely. But he stopped doing that. And so Donald Trump is in some sense adopting one of the campaign tactics of Joe Biden, which is basically hide a little bit. Like, don't be out in front. Let's have other people out, the surrogates out, you know. Now, in the case of Donald Trump, it's let's have the doctors out, and basically, you know, let that be the face of the election. Let that be the face of the campaign. Oh, I'm just listening to the experts, right? So that's one of the sort of campaign tactics which Donald Trump is adopting from Joe Biden. Basically, hide and don't don't have your face out there too much. Now, is Donald Trump capable of that in the long run? We're gonna have to see. Now, the other thing I do want to show you guys is that it's also really bad because Joe Biden just hasn't made any kind of serious progress when it comes to his favorability. So you can see here, this is basically when you can see right here, this is when Joe Biden first entered the race. So like, you know, over a year ago, but you can see here, Joe Biden's unfavorability, he started becoming more unfavorable than favorable a little bit before he entered the race, and it's just gotten basically worse, right? You can see it pretty much just like expanding, and then it started to narrow in and get, you know, as people, you know, things started to come together and it looked like, oh, it's going to be Joe Biden. But then right here, it's basically stayed flat. It's basically stayed steady. So in other words, Joe Biden hasn't made any kind of progress in terms of favorability with his campaign. His campaign has made literally zero progress, not only since he clinched up the nomination, but really since Super Tuesday. Joe Biden has made no progress, nothing with the American people. And that's terrifying. I mean, if you have any interest, any inclination in getting Donald Trump out of office, clearly Joe Biden is not doing the right job. Now, I've called on this channel. I think Joe Biden needs to drop out. I think the allegations from Tara Reade are serious and they are credible, and that we need to listen to women. But if Joe Biden isn't going to do this, it's obvious. I mean, you saw those numbers the same as I just saw them. Joe Biden needs to change something about his campaign strategy, because right now his campaign strategy is basically duck and cover, which worked well for the primaries. He was able to just duck and nobody was able to scrutinize him or look into the fact that he has all these creepy videos of him inappropriately touching women. But also, I mean, right, like nobody could really look into that stuff. And then, people had this sort of imagined ideal of Joe Biden. But he's trying to do that right now in the general election when we really need a leader, when we need someone who can present a clear and distinct alternative to Donald Trump, and that's not what Joe Biden is doing. Instead, I mean, we talked about this, I just had a video about this earlier, which is that instead Joe Biden's trying to do clickbaity kind of like warm, fuzzy feeling videos which don't talk about policy in the middle of a pandemic, in the middle of a crisis, when we have millions, tens of millions of people going on uninsurance, when we have people losing their jobs left and right, when we have people struggling to pay their bills, when we're talking about 1 in 5 children not having enough food to eat, when we're talking about 35% of households in this country not having enough food. I mean, this is absolutely terrifying. The situation that we're in right now is incredibly grim, and it doesn't seem like Joe Biden is presenting any kind of clear alternative. He's not presenting a clear path to normalcy, which, by the way, was his entire campaign. He was like, oh, we need to go back to normal, as if just getting Donald Trump out of office would just bring us back to normal, right? Of course, that's not the case. But that's what Joe Biden was running on. But it doesn't seem like Joe Biden is going to be capable of delivering that for us, because Joe Biden's campaign is all just a complete facade. It's about this imagined ideal of who he is, and it's not actually presenting a way to bring us back to so-called normal, which, by the way, I'm not sure that normal times really exist for most people, because what Joe Biden means by normal is basically back to the Obama age. But for a lot of people, that was a really tough time. Obama's years in office were really, really tough and really, really difficult for a lot of people. In fact, it was the Obama years, it was the Obama age, which brought about Donald Trump. And so it was a really, really difficult time for a lot of people. And the idea that bringing us back to that, that so-called mythical time would be amazing is completely absurd. But there's one other thing I want to mention here, which is that a lot of people, listen to this kind of stuff, like if you're a Biden supporter, you might be listening to this, and you might think to yourself, oh, well, you're just butthurt that Bernie Sanders lost. Look, guys, what I'm mad about is the fact that the Democratic establishment cheated Bernie Sanders out of this election, because they say, oh, well, Bernie supporters are just all butthurt about his loss. Guys, look, the fact is that the Democratic establishment cheated Bernie Sanders. They went together, they got together, they made phone calls, Obama made phone calls to all coalesce around Joe Biden at one particular moment and have a TV event parading all these people from the Democratic Party behind Joe Biden to say, look, we've made our decision, this is who we're going with. And let me ask you something. If you're someone who's honestly thinking to yourself that, oh, well, no, it was a completely fair election, let me ask you this. Just do a thought experiment here. If it had gone the other way, and if Pete Buttigieg, if Amy Klobuchar, if Beto O'Rourke had all, same event, same night, came out and endorsed Bernie Sanders, on the other hand, and had that same parade, the media was praising him, do you think that the voters would have still gone with Joe Biden? If you say no to that question, then it is intellectually dishonest for you, or at least, you're going to have to do a serious, you're going to have to come up with a real argument for why there's that discrepancy, right? Like, if you think that it was completely fair for, the Democratic establishment to do that for Joe Biden, why wouldn't it also be fair for them to do it for Bernie Sanders? And I think the answer is obvious, which is that the Democratic establishment put their finger down to stop Bernie Sanders. Why? Because, it was too radical to have Medicare for all during a time of crisis. It was too radical to pay off people's student debt, even though literally trillions of dollars are being sucked away to student debt, are being sucked away to credit card debt, are being sucked away from predatory payday lenders, right? Like this idea, it's just completely ridiculous, and it really, really upsets me. I don't want to rant too long about it. So anyway, if you did like this video, though, I'd appreciate it if you hit the like button and consider subscribing. Thanks.